Evening, ladies and gentlemen. So this is actually my first event that I've actually been to. I've been a member for a couple of years, but I haven't actually had privilege of coming to an event. So apologies in advance. I've not had a benchmark to actually set in terms of how good this is going to be. So hopefully I'll be among the masses of, I can't quite compare to some of the people on here, but yeah, let's see overall. Now in terms of how I wanted to go over this evening, I'm normally used to fundraising for a lot of our individual projects. So it's very different. I don't want to do a sales pitch to you all. Yeah, I just thought a good idea would be for me to explain where I've come from, what I'm doing at the moment, what I've learnt along the journey. I've now been in property for 15 years or so. And then hopefully we can share some talking points after on and grab a beer after to talk over. So in terms of where it all started, I've been, straight after graduating from university, I went into management consultancy. I was there for 3 years. I enjoyed it, but there's something yearning to do something a little bit different and be creator of my own destiny. And I didn't quite know what it was, but I've always had a passion for property. So I initially started looking at UK property. I then started looking at international property. I wanted to get something that I could utilise. I had a relatively good income, so I wanted to look at places that I could invest overseas. And what I really hated at the time was the fact that in overseas property, this is mainly in the likes of Cyprus and Spain, it's a very hard sell. So it's the ex-timeshare, so we're talking kind of early 2000, 2001, 2002. It's very hard sell, very sharky, and I was working in management consultancy, had a relatively good career, and I just wanted to deal with like-minded people that could offer advice on where to invest, where in the world to invest, and not sell to me. I wanted to make my own decisions in terms of where I wanted to invest, and I wanted to make that informed decision myself based on facts and research. But surprisingly, back in 2002, 2003, there wasn't one company out there that could offer genuine investment advice on international property investment. So that's where Property Financier was founded, and that's where I started. So originally, I did invest. It's a bit of a, I've spoken to a few people this evening about my first ever investment, which was overseas investment, which was in Cyprus. I still own that property, and we're talking about rich dad, poor dad. That's a liability. That's not earning me any money overall. And it was really on the way back from purchasing that, I thought, hang on a minute, there's got to be a better way of doing property investment by education, by presenting the tools, and that's where it led me to found Property Financier as an agent. So that was back in 2004. God, that's quite a long time ago now, almost 15 years ago. And over the years, we developed and we grew the company into mainly emerging markets. So Property Financier, as it says in its name, it's mainly emerging markets that we're looking at. So we traded a lot in South America, in China, Dubai at the time, 2004, 2005 was a big market for us. And I couldn't help feeling, well, hang on a minute, I'm selling all of these properties, people are making money out of these properties, but I'm not really kind of participating in them as much as I wanted to because I got too engrossed in the day-to-day business. So I ended up taking a bit of a step back, getting a management team in for the company, and then looking at, rather than developing, because I didn't have the experience of the actual developing, is actually looking at funding. So this was a couple of good investors, in particular in Dubai, that had made a lot of money through us. We put together a mini fund and we invested in Dubai again, and that's where I started to build income enough to actually start moving into development myself. So we moved into development around 2006, and I'll tell you a story later on in terms of how that development, Lara, you know, obviously our connection through Lara many years ago in the Caribbean when we were developing out the Caribbean, but that's a story for later on. And then post 2008, we've been very focused on more UK development. So smaller schemes. When I was in my 20s, when I first started, I was very bullish, very confident about going out, a multi-million-pound turnover, and this is what's going to happen. But it never happened. And that bottom right-hand corner of that spreadsheet, it didn't quite happen because I was a bit too bullshy at the time, I think. So certainly over the last few years, I've been focused on UK property development and particularly trading. What I mean by trading is underwriting. So we tend to buy a lot of our own properties and we exchange on them and we sell the majority. We tend to keep the freehold and we sell the majority on to investor clients that we've built up over the years. Feel free to ask any questions, by the way, if you want halfway through. And Matt, can you tell me if I start to run over as well, because I haven't practiced this or anything as well. So over the years, we've worked in over 45 markets. We've generated about 40 million in profits, just over 40 million in profits for our investors over the last 15 years or so. In fact, some of the core members, notice are former employees of ours as well, that have worked really well. It's actually interesting. I was convinced by Lara to come and join the club. I didn't know much about it, but already in the last 3 or 4 months, we've already had several really good conversations with good contacts and good investors that we're looking at doing a few projects with already as well. But over the years, we've, through our company or through Property Financiers, about £500 million has been invested through the different developments across the different, that's around 32, I think it is, countries that we've covered now, over 45 markets. And my passion is international property. So I've been talking to a few people this evening. I'm always open to individual developments across the globe. I love travelling. I love meeting new people and moving to new continents. I've been very focused on the UK, and I'll go through some example projects soon. But definitely very interested in international property developments and projects. If anybody in the room or anybody watching this has anything there. So just a really quick summary in terms of the group. So Property Financiers here is really just the sales and marketing arm of the company. We've also got Global Edge, which is based up in Manchester. That is another company that we set up, or we actually acquired, and that's more distribution. So Property Financiers, we have a database of 200,000 or so investors all over the globe, big face in Asia and the Middle East and UK, but a lot of expats investors. And they tend to be involved predominantly in buying end units. We've got Financiers Ventures, which is a separate division, which we work with a lot more high net worth individual family offices. So there's 36 families at the moment that we're working with, and that tends to be more on the equity and the initial investment on some of the developments that we're looking at globally. So I should have put together a chart which kind of mentions, but effectively it starts in Property Financiers Ventures with our own developments, where we joint venture with individual people to structure our own property developments. And then we use Property Financiers to seed the initial probably pre-sale, so de-risk the project. And then we go through to Global Edge, the international and local agents in the UK, to try and maximise GDV. And then we've got our development SPVs. So we use, as most developers, special purpose vehicles for each separate development. A couple of times when we exit and we still use the same SPV. But we've got several SPVs that we develop under separately, and we always start that every time we do a development ourselves. Something that I'm also very passionate about, and it's mainly through a lot of my travels abroad, working in emerging markets and seeing what influence and impact we have on, especially in places like Nicaragua and Belize, where there's a lot of people below the poverty line. And I've got to be honest, it wasn't something I set out from day one to set up the foundation, but it's just interesting seeing within an investment coming into the different areas, what real impact and dramatic impacts you bringing a development and employment into the area has. And so since then we've set up the foundation and we're trying to do independent projects, no grandiose big projects. It's really looking at ways that we can help small communities. I don't want to go and donate money to charities where we don't know where it goes to. The whole idea between the foundation is that we can actually pull small. So the first project we ever did was a £5,000 raise for a well, which is 160 people drinking water in Zambia. We raised it. It was good fun in the process of raising it through triathlons and various things, trying to lose my weight. But that's certainly something I'm very passionate about. So if anyone has any other projects in international markets or even the UK, we're certainly doing a lot in Halifax, where we're doing a lot of development ourselves, where we're supporting local children in the local area. But that's something that's close to my heart now. It's developed over the years as well. So I'll go over the timeline in a minute in terms of where we started and where we got to. But between 2004 and 2008, that's where I spent a lot of the time building up, trying to identify the hot new markets, the emerging markets. Dubai, most of us would have heard about what happened in the Dubai market. Had a massive boom, fell off a cliff, and started to come in and is bouncing along. But we rode across right at the very beginning of the market, right around 2002, 2003. And our biggest project that we did is we weren't the developer on here, we were the exclusive agents, and we worked to sell 171 5-star serviced apartments. So this is what got us into hotel, and I'll explain how we get into hotel investments overall. But we originally were very focused on residential, but through the Bonington Town, Dubai and Jumeirah Lakes, that was the heyday prior to the recession. So that was 2006. I remember the seminars that we were doing at the hotels locally here, and you had people queuing up to actually to buy property. But people that bought at that early stage made a killing in terms of average yields there, probably around 9% based on what they, that's 9% net based on what they purchased at. And a lot of people held on to it, but people that sold at the right time almost doubled their money from buying Jumeirah Lakes at the time that we were there. Belize, somewhere I spent a bit of time as well. It's a small scale development, it's only 68 units. We're actually looking at the next development next door to this now. But that was apartments, but managed as a hotel as well. And we were very prevalent. We were one of the first people in the Shanghai market when we first started. Again, going back to what I was saying before, I love travelling, so I love meeting new people, seeing new sites. And this is when this 2006, 2007 as well, when the market was booming. And a lot of people bought into this. Is pure hotel rooms, individual rooms. It's a 4-star hotel in the central business district in Shanghai, and we sold out that within about 6 months or so. And the wild card here, where people probably raise a few eyebrows, is Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. So this by far was our best performing asset that we ever sold. And I'd like to hold my hands up and say, I'd like to say that it was all through our own research. Part of it was, but it was luck that we came across the developer who was actually developing. It's an American developer that was developing, mainly catered for there was no quality 4-star, 5-star accommodation in UB, in Ulaanbaatar at the time. But there's a lot of influx of staff, especially iron ore and mineral workers that were coming into the area. And that's why we piggybacked on the fact that there's a lot of international companies that were investing into the country, but there wasn't any quality accommodation so I wish I'd invested in the company at an earlier stage, the development company at an earlier stage, but because it was a wild card, we thought we'd try, we'll sell a handful of units, but we ended up selling 3 developments for these guys in the past. But that was definitely one of the success stories for us, because it worked very well for us, but also for our investors, because people that bought there more than doubled their money over a 3 to 5 year period, and genuine yields based on what they purchased at were around 25%, which sounds horrendous, and I don't think we'll find many more markets like that right now, but that was certainly one of the kind of the biggest and most successful markets for us at the time. So then 2008 happened, and we all know, and I'm not going to dwell on that, although I will go onto the slide in a minute explaining kind of what it did for us, because it was my biggest impact personally on the business. But we very much moved, because people come 2008, it was mainly a lot of the wives saying, no bloody way, you're not investing in emerging markets, we're not putting a capital there, we're going to keep it safe and somewhere in the UK. And so that's why a lot of our focus then turned to more developed markets. We did a lot in the US. But we started doing quite a lot in the UK, and this is where, going back from the development side, I thought, well, hang on a minute, this is probably a good opportunity for me to now get into development. And so the first project we did over here was in Belfast, of all places, because it was an emerging market. This wasn't actually our own development, this was a joint venture that we did with the developer themselves, and that they were very open with their business model in terms of what they needed to get down to debt drawdown. So we structured our commercial arrangement with them. So once they got to debt drawdown, de-risk the project, then we got a big bonus on that. So it's effectively us being the developer, not actually doing the contracting at the end of it. The other subsequent 3, because I live in Oxford at the moment, or Oxfordshire, we focused on the Oxford and Bicester markets, very small scale developments. So the first one was Lakesmere, that's a permitted development scheme. It was an old industrial site that converted into 22 1- and 2-bedroom apartments. We thought it might be quite hard to sell because of the fact that it was commercial. This is the very early stages of permitted development, and so we jumped on it. You probably can't see from the pictures, but it wasn't the most attractive looking development, but we thought we'd try it out. Managed to change all the windows and kind of spec'd it up quite well from a buy-to-let perspective. and that flew. So within 2 months, we had sold out that, and that enabled us to then moved on to acquire another site in Bicester. And this is right in the centre of Bicester, which was 17 one and two bedroom apartments. And the Bicester one was on an underwrite basis, so we bought all of those apartments from the developer, and then we sold all of those to, well, we kept one, but we sold all of those to our individual buyers, and they've done pretty well out of that overall. I think it's one of those things when you look at it from a pricing point of view, you think, okay, what do you think we can achieve from a GDV perspective? We bought quite keenly, so we didn't want to be too greedy, so we added our margins, but realistically, we should have put a lot more on those margins because we could have sold them for a lot more. But this was the early stages, and hey, a bird in the hand is the learning lesson. And one of our more recent development is in Halifax. So Halifax has been a big area for us recently. This is the mill conversion. I fell in love with the building when I first got it presented. I didn't know anything about Halifax, and I was a bit sceptical, to be honest, because I didn't know what the market was doing. But what I found really interesting was the fact that the council were very supportive about bringing old buildings back to life. So this is an old derelict mill building that had been derelict for 2 decades. It was an old cotton mill, and then it went to a jazz club, but it was just laid derelict. So this was actually a pretty expensive fit out because we had to keep, or wanted to keep, the original facade. The roof was completely shot, and I should have shown you before and after pictures. The roof was completely shot, so we had to put reinforced steel all through the middle, so it's more expensive than doing a new build. But the results now, we're just completing, PC is actually next Monday on the first tranche, and then 2 weeks after for the second tranche. So that's been a satisfying, satisfying development for us. It's only 60 units, but it's 60 units where I think people will do quite well. We've kept a couple on sale. The majority we've sold on, and Property Frontier side of it, in the initial phases when we first started pricing, they were roughly 10% below what we were selling the last tranche for as well. So in terms of what we do, we tend to look for, because of the fact that from the background of Property Frontiers, we're looking more for our investor clients. So we're actually looking at another site in the West Country, where we probably won't use Property Frontiers from a fundraising perspective, because to maximise the GDV, we'll want to sell through local agents at a 1.5% margin. Property Frontiers is specialist, I guess, in de-risking projects at an early stage, be it off-plan. We don't tend to get involved pre-planning. It's got to have planning permission in place, but we tend to get involved once planning permission's in place, once title's owned, and the project is fairly de-risked because we know what the financial models are, we know what the costings are. We will then go in and de-risk that after equity typically, and before debt kicks in. So obviously, as most developers will know, a lot of banks and a lot of funders or bridge funders, they require getting to a certain amount before they can actually draw down on the debt. So that's where we potentially come in to actually start seed funding, either ourselves for our investors or through pre-sales overall. On top of that, just a few other bits and pieces. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier on that the founding principle for Property Frontiers was to offer professional advice. And one thing that we all know, the property industry is not regulated, especially the international property industry, which is full, how do I put it politely, but full of a lot of sharks, ex-timeshare. And so what I wanted to do is bring a bit more regulation into the overseas property industry. So I was on the founding committee of the AIPP, Association of International Property Professionals, and that's something that I'm deeply passionate about. I was on the board for 6 years. It's a self-regulating body. It's not a government regulating body. It's not mandatory, but it's people that join have to abide by a code of conduct. And if there are any issues for buyers, then there's a disciplinary panel to at least offer some protection for buyers moving forward. It's something that we've been lobbying with the government as well, because I do think regulation will come into this industry at some point and needs to come into this industry at some point. So that's one of the things that I've been working on quite prevalently. And also backing that is the telling, not selling principle. We wrote a book, the first edition was in 2008, which is Where to Buy Property Abroad, an Investor's Guide. Got to number 7 on Amazon in property books. And it wasn't really to promote, it wasn't the revenue generated out of the book sales or self-publicity. I'm not interested in that. It was really giving investors people the tools. What questions to ask agents? Do they have planning permission? Do they have land title? So you can probably pick it up for about 99p on eBay now, but it's certainly something that we've tried to bring in to try and bring some profession and regulation into the industry as a whole. Financial services, I'll go on to in a minute. We have a small arm which is Frontier's Financial Services, which is a international mortgage advisory. But something that we have been or were looking at prior to 2008 is raising a fund, and it's a larger fund. As I said, when I was in my 20s, it was a lot more bulky in terms of what we're looking at. That was a 100 million development fund that we're working with an ex-JP Morgan banker, that we had raised the first 10 million, and the family offices and institutions would put in the rest. That didn't happen because of 2008, but we've retained the same contacts, and we're currently doing two small funds, which are the UK Development Fund and an international seed capital fund. The UK fund is going to be around 5 million, and the international seed capital about 7.5. So that's something that I'm happy to talk to you in more detail about, and we're going to be launching those early part of next year as well. Financier Foundation I've covered as well already. So in terms of where we come into the process, so it really is any part from site acquisition through to practical completion, through to legal completion, any part in between there. So obviously we have experience of our own developments, so we like to work with people that have land, don't know what to do with it. That's the most fun thing for me, because from an advisory point of view, we can work as a joint venture partner with people that own land but want to monetize that. But also through to people that have planning permission, know what they want to do, don't want to sell to the local market, and want to de-risk their position before going through to bank funding, all the way through to having bank funding and just wanting to take a chunk out to de-risk the project as well. And also on our own projects, obviously, and through Global Edge, our other company up in Manchester, we use a lot of local agents. So we've got a big network of local agents to raise funds for projects overall. So just want to take you on a bit of a journey. I think a lot of people have said, well, how have you done it? What have you done? And kind of, what's your whole kind of journey through? I think people think from the outside that it's all hunky-dory, everything's kind of has gone well. And this is more for members, and maybe again, if it's not something that we share kind of externally, but I thought I wanted to actually kind of take you through the mishaps as well, or some of the mistakes that I've made in my journey, in my 15-year property career, I guess. And hopefully you can take some of the learning lessons from that. We can have a chat over a beer, kind of over what has happened. But I just thought I'd take you through. So we started in 2004 in sales, went into development, which is through Dint. A lot of people that are doing the fundraising like the idea of getting into development. Then that happened in 2008. Our biggest thing there was, and this is where I kind of mentioned about my connection with Lara, we were developing it's 135 million GDV project in Grenada in the Caribbean, and we had secured our equity funding, 8 million equity funding through a family office, but we had our senior debt from Capthing, Singer and Friedlander. So the day that I got that call, which our debt financing had dried up, was probably the second worst day in my career. So overnight, the whole project, we had to pull tarpaulin over the project because our senior debt had completely dried up. But that's also a large lesson in terms of you've got to be really careful about your fundraising, where you actually get to. And I was probably because I was in my 20s at the time, was very much, right, let's go, screw it, let's go, let's do it, and let's kind of run out with it. And I lost a lot of money in that whole process. But if it doesn't kill you, as the saying goes, and that's why I'm kind of still here. And I am still looking for that next project, by the way. If that next project is out there, I'm still keen to get back on there because we know the contacts now, more so from an equity point of view, and certainly from a senior debt. But yeah, that was an interesting part of my career overall. Post 2008, mentioned went into UK sales, and then into development, and trading is what is the underwriting side of it. That's where we buy at typically a 15% discount directly we commit, we exchange, and then we sell the majority of those units onto our investor clients as well. And this is my graph, my curve, I guess, in terms of kind of where it's gone. So grew very quickly up until 2008. had that big mishap of that development in the Caribbean. Then when we moved into UK development, one of the things that we found is, and I'm not casting kind of a blanket over everyone in property, but people that have worked in property for a long time know that there's a lot of shysters out there. And back in 2011, we sold around 35 million GDV of student property in Liverpool. And the developer was working very closely with us, got to the end, decided not to pay us to the tune of about 1.5 million. So that nearly sank the company back then as well. So what am I saying this all about? It's mainly kind of learning lessons. And the most important thing, I suppose, rather than all of this, from my point of view, it's gut. Rely on your gut and find nice people to work with. Because a lot of the time at the early stages, and I'm speaking to a few people today that kind of venturing out into property development, and obviously it's exciting times, you see the numbers, you can see what can be made, and great, there's been several successful projects, but every time I've gone against my gut, that's when it has gone wrong. And you kind of almost sense that it's really risky, but somehow you just push it through and the kind of thing. That's certainly kind of in your earlier career, you certainly think about that and you think, oh, well, it doesn't matter, I'll hide over that. But it's all about people. From my side, I'm not saying that's kind of prevalent with everyone, but you've got to work with fundamentally nice people, not people that want to make a short-term profit, because they will screw you over. And I've been screwed over quite a few times. So yeah, that's the one bit of advice that kind of I'd say overall. And one of the things that I've always been taught as well is take things on face value, and that there's a lot of people that say they've got planning permission, say they own the site. You wouldn't believe the amount of people that approach us and say they own the site, they've got planning, but they don't own it, they're putting an option on it, or they haven't even put money down on an option on site. So due diligence is a key in everything we do, just to make sure we can try and minimise our risk, but also if we're selling off plan, which we do a lot, then we want to try and minimise the investor risk, because also ultimately, if investors don't make money through us, they don't reinvest through us, and that's where we built the company through people reinvesting. So just in terms of what we look for, so as I mentioned, UK is a big focus of ours, but international is something that I'm deeply passionate about. Typically, project sizes between 2 and 100 million, and that equates to roughly, depending on the project, 15 to 150. In the UK, it tends to be, we've very much got a strong focus on secondary cities. So from 2011 to now, we've been very much focused on Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester. We're finding now that yields have been compressed. Prices we're selling in Manchester, or Liverpool in particular, 180 a square foot. People are now trying to command 450 a square foot, and they're still trying to advertise yields of 6 or 7, 8% in some cases. We're starting to move away from those areas now and look for, I suppose, more tertiary areas where the fundamentals are right. So the supply and demand, there's a lot of demand or increasing demand, but no one's supplying, so no one's spotted the opportunity. So like the Halifax is a good example. Hereford's another one that we're actually looking at. So I'm open to any suggestions of areas where it might seem a bit tertiary, but that's what I'm more interested in. I don't want to go for the masses and follow the crowds where everyone else is going. So we're looking for stuff that's fundamentally, and Halifax, we were lucky in finding that as well, and that there's a lot of inward investment going into the area. The council are very supportive, which means that we can piggyback on the inward investment that's going into the area because no one else has seen the opportunity. So no one else started developing in Halifax, by the way, now. But those are the kind of opportunities that we are looking for. If we're underwriting, we tend to buy or want to buy ourselves at a 15% on rule of thumb discount to market value. So we'll have our own RICS valuation conducted, and we'll commit to purchase all those units if we believe in the story, location, the area, like the mill building. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a whole site. It can be part of the site. So if a developer says, right, okay, it's a 100-unit development, but I can sell you 25 at a 15% discount because I want that capital in, then that's kind of stuff that we can work on. And likewise with individuals that own land and they want to actually they want to monetize that and they don't have experience in development, then that's where we can come in, and that's what I personally find interesting on the development side as well. I think I'm almost there, sorry guys. So, okay, on top of, I'm not going to go over the joint venture, I've covered joint venture, I covered international sales and marketing consultancy. The three main things I'm working on now, I talked about the UK Development Fund. That's something that we're raising. It's going to be a regulated entity that we're working with an institutional investor on. And we're part doing that through our own investors and part doing that through institutional funding. And we're going to be looking for opportunities pre-planning. So we did an experiment in Cambridge 2 years ago, or so 18 months or so ago, where we just wanted to we raised just under £1 million to go and acquire sites in strategically good locations. That's done very well. Those clients are now sitting there waiting to actually reinvest in something else. So we're now putting it into a development fund, and then we're going to gear it through institutional investment as well. And equity fundraising through our family office connections and through some of our high net worth investors. We are typically looking for minimum or minimum of 100 up to 5 million in equity funding if there's a project that needs the equity upfront, depending on what the location and gearing ratios are. We could be interested in that. But the next big thing for me is everyone's probably been or seen some part of it is crowdfunding. And we've just gone through the whole AR, the appointed representative process. And we're going to be launching in February of next year our crowdfunding platform, UK Development Crowdfunding. So this is going to be more for small scale projects where we can chuck a bit of, so we'll raise on individual projects. So obviously we won't be ready to raise until February, but we're getting everything ready before then. And the whole provides us that it's even to small HMOs all the way through to large multi-million pound developments. We should be able to, we're not going to do that straight away, we're going to do the small HMOs for small projects initially. We'll like to invest ourselves into that to take a small equity chunk in that. But that's probably going to be my main focus over the next kind of 6 months or so. Any questions at all?
Give you a round of applause. Yeah.
Thank you.